screens flare to white as a leaked video crashes into every feed, and the room inhales fear. Aria Vale said, "Turn it off," but the audio keeps rolling, raw and shaking. A gasp cuts through applause from some old concert clip spliced beneath the scream. Damian Cross said, "It's handled," yet the footage shows a hand slamming a door. Lena Park said, "We need counsel now," while phones light like sirens on a runway. Marco Reyes said, "This isn't gossip," and he begins to thread the timeline aloud. The paparazzi flood a sidewalk as if it were a battlefield dressed in neon. Aria Vale said, "That's not the whole night, but the edit is merciless." In a dim corridor, a shadowed figure whispers a name that chills the frame. Theo Miles said, "I saved the master," and silence snaps like a twig under weight. A judge's gavel lands over a montage of shattered trophies and perfect smiles. Sienna Hart said, "Please call me back," and her voicemail lands like a bruise. The anchor declares a nightmare dressed as pop culture, measured and cold. Aria Vale said, "Tell them I did not start it," while the city holds its breath. And then the chyron changes, and the word crime burns across the night. Sirens braid with hashtags as the video copies itself across a million screens like a virus with teeth. Carla Boone said, "We have confirmation the footage is authentic," and the newsroom turns glacial. Aria Vale said, "They cut the part where he grabbed me," and her voice lands like a cracked glass. Damian Cross said, "Statements only through my office," and he locks the door as if the air could leak secrets. Lena Park said, "We need timestamps, we need the chain," and her clipboard trembles against her ribs. Marco Reyes said, "The audio has a jump at 2 minutes, and he marks the skip like a wound on the timeline." The city pulses with blue light as cruisers loop the venue and fans weep into scarves bought hours ago. Aria Vale said, "He will bury me," and thunder turns the windows into mirrors. Theo Miles said, "I archived the raw take offsite," and he looks down, measuring risk against breath. A publicist drafts a mercy that sounds like denial and tastes like smoke. Sienna Hart said, "I am coming to you," in a text that hangs like a lifeline over a grave. Headlines climb each other like ants hunting sugar and not caring who gets crushed. Aria Vale said, "I'm not your villain," and her hands learn the weight of silence. Somewhere a lock clicks, and the night sharpens. A podium appears like a confession box, and the city waits to be absolved by facts that cut. Marco Reyes said, "Authorities are reviewing the full recording," and pens poise like blades over paper. A spokesperson said, "No arrests yet," and the crowd groans, starving for certainty. Aria Vale said, "If they see all of it, they will know," and her faith flickers like a candle near a vent. Damian Cross said, "We dispute the implication of criminal conduct," and the phrase feels engineered for distance. Lena Park said, "Stop speaking without counsel," and she pinches the bridge of her nose until color drains. Theo Miles said, "There is a second angle," and eyes widen as if a door opened in a locked room. The press lights bleach truth until it looks like a rumor wearing a suit. Sienna Hart said, "Don't meet him alone," and the text hums like a wire trapped in a wall. A detective watches without blinking, indexing faces for stories that bleed. Aria Vale said, "I want to sing tomorrow night," and the room stares as if she told a joke at a funeral. The podium microphone pops like a small storm. Marco Reyes said, "This is bigger than a headline," and the lenses lean closer. The live stream spins up, a thin thread tossed over a canyon, and comments flicker like sparks. Aria Vale said, "I will tell you myself," and her breath catches once before the smile lands. A producer counts down, and truth tries to beat the clock while fear holds its coat. Damian Cross said, "End it if she says names," through a clenched whisper that bruises the air. Lena Park said, "Keep it general," and she gestures a boundary no storm respects. The chat floods with hearts that drown under knives shaped like words. Aria Vale said, "That night was chaos, and I was scared," and the screen leans closer. A new clip drops midstream, and the overlay punches her monologue into silence. Theo Miles said, That cut is doctored, and he scrubs with fury that leaves fingerprints on the timeline. Sienna Hart said, "Please call," and the message rides the bottom like a tide warning. The stream glitches, the ring light hiccups, and the illusion tears along an old seam. Aria Vale said, "He isn't who you think," before the audio coughs. The feed dies, and the world howls. The second leak spreads like a matchbook flicked into dry grass, and alarms wake neighbors who never cared for pop. Marco Reyes said, "The new clip shows a struggle near the stairwell, and the word struggle hangs heavy." Aria Vale said, "He blocked the door, and memory pulls a seam that spills heat." Damian Cross said, "She was hysterical, and the syllables slide like oil over the floor." Lena Park said, "Legal is en route, and her phone buzzes with calendars that feel like shackles." Theo Miles said, "Timecode proves a cut, and he points to the seam like a scar no makeup hides." Sienna Hart said, "Someone got hurt, and the truth crawls out of the dark with tired eyes." A siren dips, then rises, the sound of a city taking sides. Carla Boone said, "Sources indicate hospital intake that night, and the newsroom holds its breath to clip the sentence." Aria Vale said, "I tried to help, and the room chills as the word tried echoes." The anchor clears her throat and calls it what it is, and the Chiron does not blink. The night decides this will not be rumor anymore. The door slams shut on sympathy, and the center of the story is no longer a stage. Morning breaks on old footage where the world first met Aria, and the room softens. Aria Vale said, "I sang to keep the lights on, and the memory breathes like steam." A line coils around a club under neon that smelled like hope. Marco Reyes said, "Her demo was a prayer with teeth, and he cues a clip that glows." Lena Park said, "She learned contracts by candlelight, and the frame warms." A mother's kitchen radio becomes a stage, and pots keep time like drums. Aria Vale said, "Every note taught me to bend pitches, not truth, and eyes missed." Theo Miles said, "She recorded in an attic with blankets for walls and snare taps." A first handshake blooms into a tour laminate, and the roar crowns a sparrow queen. Sienna Hart said, "She saved my set once, and the laugh is summer." The camera lingers on a thrift dress turned into Alma by Will. Aria Vale said, "I thought love would be applause forever, and the beat slows. A shadow edges the frame, cold and patient, and the seed of ruin is planted where the lights burn warmest." The first single climbs like a kite, catching a violent wind, and the city sings her name. Aria Vale said, "They told me to smile brighter, and the billboard obliges." A magazine calls her inevitable, and the word tastes metallic. Lena Park said, "Schedule is a ladder with broken rungs, and pages flip. Designers pin glitter to doubt, and cameras devour it." Aria Vale said, "I missed my sister's wedding for a photo call, and regret blinks." Backstage, a silence hums louder than the chorus. Theo Miles said, "She turned breaths into fireworks, and waveforms crown." Marco Reyes said, "Early reviews read like coronations, and his pen circles joy." Sienna Hart said, "We shared one mic when the power failed, and the crowd became choir. Every triumph files a sharp edge for later." Aria Vale said, "I earned this," and the mirror nods like a fan with secrets. The elevator dings at the top, and the doors open to wolves dressed as roses. He appears in the frame like a promise wrapped in iron, and the room pivots. Damian Cross said, "I can protect you," and the syllables lock. Contracts flower on tables like bait made of paper. Aria Vale said, "What does protect mean?" and the smile freezes. Lena Park said, "Run clauses by counsel, and the printer whirs. He gifts silence with diamonds, and silence fits." Theo Miles said, "He rebooked the studio without asking, and cables snake." Marco Reyes said, "His past is a fog with invoices, and he underlines dates." Sienna Hart said, "He smiled at everyone and counted exits, and a chill spreads." Aria Vale said, "He believes in me, and belief learns a leash." A door closes softly, and freedom shrinks 3 inches. Damien Cross said, "Your circle is inefficient," and chairs vanish. The camera pulls back, and boundaries thin to glass. Tour life becomes a moving maze, where sleep is a rumor, and grace is rented. Aria Vale said, "I just need 1 quiet hour," and the bus laughs. Emails multiply like hailstones in July. Lena Park said, "We skipped due diligence to hit Q3, and the word skips. A sponsorship seals a promise with invisible penalties." Theo Miles said, "He replaced our security with his, and I'ds change hands." Damien Cross said, "Image first, safety follows, and a shiver files it." Marco Reyes said, "A foundation was launched without paperwork, and ink stalls." Sienna Hart said, "They used my name on a pledge, and guilt tightens." Aria Vale said, "I authorized nothing," and the page stares blankly. The crowd surges louder, and the stage shakes like a bridge. A photo up hides a bruise under couture. The ceiling drips from a storm no forecast showed. The gala crowns her with glass light and whispers sharpened into knives. Aria Vale said, "Just 1 speech and we go," and the chandeliers smirk. A donor grins with a ledger soul. Damien Cross said, "Smile, and history will obey," and cameras kneel. Lena Park said, "Your name is on the grant," and her pulse spikes. Theo Miles said, "Numbers don't reconcile," and the spreadsheet pales. Sienna Hart said, "They used my track to sell tickets," and shame sings off key. Marco Reyes said, "Receipts point to shell accounts," and the word shell echoes. Aria Vale said, "Stop this now," and music misses a beat. The applause is a storm of coins falling through holes. A flash catches a tear pretending to be glitter. Damien Cross said, "We'll fix it after," and after vanishes. The night smiles, and the mask slips 1 inch too far. Morning headlines arrive like a swarm, and sympathy drains by the column inch. Aria Vale said, "They think the glitter was armor, and the mirror gives no answer." Marco Reyes said, "Financial questions are multiplying," and his notes rasp. Lena Park said, "We need transparency," but the spreadsheets cough dust. Damien Cross said, "We disclose on our terms," and the door clicks shut. Theo Miles said, "There are backups offsite," and the word offsite feels like a vault. Sienna Hart said, "The charity email used my name, and shame burns hot." An influencer thread turns suspicion into sport, and points keep score. Aria Vale said, "I can repay everything," as if money could bribe fate. A fan tears a poster and tapes it back, confused by love's math. Marco Reyes said, "Wire transfers overlap tour dates and timelines not." Lena Park said, "If we stall, we drown," and the clock breathes louder. Damien Cross said, "We manage perception," and the phrase tastes like tin. The city leans in and decides to distrust the smile that once lit its billboards. The label conference room smells like citrus, cleaner, and fear. Aria Vale said, "Give me the masters," and the table flinches. Damien Cross said, "Ownership is strategic," and the word strategic scratches. Lena Park said, "We can mediate," and a calendar pings like a metronome. Theo Miles said, "The raw takes prove continuity," and he holds a drive like a passport. A senior exec smiles as if the story were a stain to buff out. Aria Vale said, "I will not be edited into a villain," and chairs squeal. Marco Reyes said, "Legal wants cooperation," and pens tap tight. Sienna Hart said, "If truth costs me bookings, fine," and her voice steadies. Damien Cross said, "Silence buys time," and silence feels expensive. The projector throws contracts onto faces and turns skin into clauses. Aria Vale said, "You promise safety," and the promise echoes bare. A storm rolls somewhere far, and the glass remembers thunder. The paparazzi stakeout grows roots, and rumor becomes harvest. Aria Vale said, "I am going to the studio," and the alley narrows. Flash bursts clip the air like hail. Marco Reyes said, their angle is blood, and he shields his notes. Sienna Hart said, walk with me, and they move as one line through teeth. Damian Cross said no questions, and security forms a wall. Theo Miles said, we need ambient audio from that night, and he checks levels. A heckler spits a headline like a curse. Aria Vale said, you didn't see what happened, and her breath skates. A camera slips and the street gasps as if made of lungs. Lena Park said, keep recording everything, and her voice is iron. Tires hiss, and the crowd folds like a bad map. Aria Vale said, I won't break here, and the door finally gives. The studio smells like wood and second chances, thin as paper. Inside the booth, truth sounds brittle until it warms. Aria Vale said, roll it, and the red light blooms. Theo Miles said, I'll sync the stairwell audio, and the timeline opens like a wound. Static clears and a muffled plea slices through pride. Aria Vale said, that's me begging, and the room stops moving. Lena Park said, timestamp aligns with security feed, and relief is a thin wire. Damian Cross said, context matters, and context feels like trapdoor rhetoric. A thud lands and another voice hardens. Marco Reyes said, this cut disappears in the viral edit, and he mocks the gap. Sienna Hart said, release the raw, and courage rips. Aria Vale said, if this saves someone else do it, and her eyes steady. Theo Miles said, we need chain of custody clean, and folders line up. The track exports and the silence afterward has weight and shape. They step into the corridor with a plan, and destiny dials anyway. Aria Vale said, we go public at noon and resolve sharpens. Lena Park said, press release drafted, and she folds it once. Theo Miles said, backups mirrored, and the drive clicks shut. Marco Reyes said, detective asked for a meeting, and calendars collide. Sienna Hart said, I will stand with you, and the words feel like armor. Damian Cross said, pause everything, and he tastes the order like sugar. The phone vibrates and becomes the center of gravity. Aria Vale said, unknown number, and fear taps her ribs. The voice arrives cold, a clock in a freezer. The caller said, if the raw goes out, the rest goes out, and silence knifes the air. Theo Miles said, there's more, and the hallway tilts. Aria Vale said, what rest, but the line is already ending. And then one night, the phone call came, and nothing was the same again. The call returns as a text file dump, and the screen fills with wire instructions like veins. Marco Reyes said, these roots bend through a charity, and his pen hesitates. Lena Park said, shells inside shells, and the dates jolt. Theo Miles said, the stairwell audio matches a cash drop, and the room chills. Aria Vale said, so the leak was bait, and the words bruise. Damian Cross said, you misunderstand leverage, and the syllables smile. A ledger shows donations that travel like ghosts to a private concierge firm. Marco Reyes said, same firm hired the hotel floor guards, and the knot tightens. Aria Vale said, he built a halo to hide a blade, and her breath steadies. The map on the wall becomes a trap with exits painted shut. Lena Park said, subpoenas buy us daylight, and hope threads a needle. Theo Miles said, the raw proves the shove wasn't hers. And the waveform sings. The truth steps out of makeup and asks for blood. The elevator opens on a woman, carrying silence like a fragile box. Rosa Alvarez said, I cleaned the 7th floor, and her hands twist. Aria Vale said, tell us what you saw, and the room leans in. Rosa Alvarez said, he pushed the guard first, and memory trembles. Marco Reyes said, payment, and he slides the photo. Rosa Alvarez said, envelope from Cross Holdings, and the word ashes. Lena Park said, we can shield you, and papers shuffle like rain. Theo Miles said, your key card logs match the time, and the timeline brightens. Aria Vale said, did anyone else see? And fear lifts. Rosa Alvarez said, a man waited by the service stairs, and a shadow hardens. Damien Cross said, "Careful whom you accuse," from a message that lands cold. The door chain rattles, and courage decides to stand anyway. The witness turns the case, and the floor tilts toward truth. He arrives with a bouquet of apologies sharpened to points. Damien Cross said, "We're aligned, and the air rejects it." Aria Vale said, "Aligned with who?" And the roses wilt. Damien Cross said, "Investors dislike chaos, and the word investors hides teeth." Lena Park said, "We have the raw and the color drains." Theo Miles said, "Your men blocked exits and the syllables cut." Damien Cross said, "Careers drown in noble gestures," and he steps closer. Aria Vale said, "You leaked me to hide you," and a storm flashes in her eyes. Marco Reyes said, "Charity funds moved before the show, and the timeline burns." Damien Cross said, "You only exist because I chose it," and the mask drops. The room hears a distant siren, and knows it is not distant. Aria Vale said, "I choose me now," and the center of the story shifts. The bouquet hits the trash like a gavel. The conference room turns courthouse when Detective Nora Quinn arrives. Nora Quinn said, "We traced the shells," and she sets down files like anchors. Aria Vale said, "Will the audio hold?" and the answer sharpens. Theo Miles said, "Chain of custody is clean, and relief thins." Lena Park said, "Witness protection now," and pens fly. Marco Reyes said, "Donor list includes club owners with sealed priors, and the walls listen." Nora Quinn said, "A fixer coordinated the stairwell lockdown, and a name glints." Aria Vale said, "He built a maze and called it love, and the maze dissolves." Damien Cross said, "You will ruin your own brand through a legal letter that rattles." Nora Quinn said, "Brand won't outrun warrants," and the clock nods. The city skyline looks like a jury about to stand. Aria Vale said, "Release the raw at noon," and the plan locks. Truth stops whispering and begins to speak. Noon arrives like a verdict before the verdict, and the upload bar crawls. Aria Vale said, "Press play," and the city hushes. The raw shows a hand that is not hers, a shove that lands like thunder. Nora Quinn said, "This corroborates Rosa," and her pen clicks shut. Marco Reyes said, "Money moved minutes later, and a ledger glows." Lena Park said, "Statement ready," and her finger hovers. Damien Cross said, "Last chance to be reasonable," and the message curdles. Theo Miles said, "Too late," and the file breathes into daylight. The crowd redraws its face as if mirrors finally told the truth. Aria Vale said, "I will testify," and the word testify becomes a blade. Somewhere, a fixer shreds his calendar and reaches for a passport. The timeline rewrites itself with a scream, a payment, and a name. The mask is gone, and what stands beneath is bigger than fame. Dawn cracks like a camera flash over the precinct, and the city holds its breath. Aria Vale said, "I'm ready," and courage fits like a thin coat. Detective Nora Quinn said, "You're not the defendant," and the hall steadies. Damien Cross said, "Publicity stunt," from a phone lit like a blade. Lena Park said, "We file the protective order now," and papers fly. Marco Reyes said, "Arrest warrant is imminent," and the word imminent hums. Theo Miles said, "I cloned the drive twice, and backups feel like prayer." Sienna Hart said, "I'll testify too," and fear loosens a notch. A black SUV noses the curb and swallows its passenger like a secret. Aria Vale said, "No more shadows," and the doors swing open to consequence. The arrest lands at noon, clean and merciless, like a door finally learning its purpose. Nora Quinn said, "Damien Cross, you're under arrest," and the lobby freezes. "Damien Cross," said lawyer, and the marble throws back the word. Aria Vale said, "I saw him shove," and memory sharpens. Lena Park said, "Cameras stay behind the tape," and order returns. Marco Reyes said, "Shell accounts tied to his concierge," and ink bites paper. Theo Miles said, chain is intact, and the evidence breathes. Damien Cross said, she owes me everything. And the cuffs answer metal truth. Sienna Hart said, no, she owes no one this. And the echo breaks. The city exhales, then immediately asks for blood. Arraignment unfolds like a script written with knives, every line cutting reputation into ribbons. Judge Harrington said, bail denied, and murmurs skid. Damien Cross said, this is theater, and the bench does not blink. Aria Vale said, he orchestrated the lockdown, and the record drinks it. Lena Park said, protect the witness list, and folders stack. Marco Reyes said, donors flipped when the raw aired, and timelines align. Theo Miles said, metadata corroborates the shove, and pixels testify. Sienna Hart said he threatened me too, and courage hardens. Nora Quinn said, we proceed to indictment, and the gavel nods. Cameras bloom like poisonous flowers outside. The trial opens under lights hotter than summer, and every breath feels juried. Prosecutor said, we will show motive, means, and the mask, and charts glow. Damien Cross said, she weaponized fame, and the words reach for escape. Aria Vale said, I begged for help in that stairwell, and silence listens. Lena Park said, here is the paper trail, and arrows march. Marco Reyes said, Cross Holdings paid the guards, and a juror swallows. Theo Miles said, here is the uncut audio, and the spike blooms. Defense said context, and the room hears constraint. Sienna Hart said he cornered me backstage, and truth walks. The jury takes notes while headlines molt into knives. Verdict day arrives like thunder wrapped in silk, and the hallway hums with appetite. Judge Harrington said guilty on counts 2 and 3, and breath evacuates. Damien Cross said appeal, and hope thins. Aria Vale said he won't touch anyone again, and relief cuts. Lena Park said, we prepared the civil filings and pens align. Marco Reyes said, this will echo beyond music, and his recorder clicks. Theo Miles said, backups go to the archive, and history locks. Sienna Hart said, I want quiet now, and the wish lands soft. Nora Quinn said, protect the witness, and the day exhales. The verdict was not the end. It was only the beginning of her ruin. The mansion breathes like a museum after a fire, and echoes catalog mistakes. Aria Vale said, it's quiet enough to hear everything I tried to bury, and step slow. Dust outlines trophies that once felt immortal, and now feel rented. Lena Park said, we'll liquidate what we can, and numbers replace applause. A cracked mirror holds 3 versions of a face that learned new weather. Marco Reyes said, public sentiment cooled, not frozen, and he circles verbs. Theo Miles said, the archive is safe, and hard drives tick like small hearts. Sienna Hart said, I hate that my name trended for pain, and she closes her eyes. Aria Vale said, I chose truth and lost shelter, and the sentence lands. Emails ping like pebbles thrown at stained glass. Nora Quinn said, security remains outside for a week, and duty lingers. Night folds over the estate, and the pool reflects a sky that refuses to judge. A small studio invites a confession without the spectacle, and the mic waits. Aria Vale said, I am not a hero or a headline, and the room stays kind. The host nods like someone watering a stubborn plant. Marco Reyes said, tell it plain from the control room glass. Aria Vale said, I believed love would keep me safe, and belief blushes. Lena Park said, stick to facts, and bullet points anchor breath. The red light turns the truth into work instead of theater. Theo Miles said, roll B, and the timeline opens its palm. Aria Vale said, I could have left sooner, and the word sooner aches. The host folds a card and lets silence carry weight. Outside, a drizzle writes cursive across the window. The segment ends with no music and a soft thank you that feels earned. Sienna's calendar looks like a forest after winter, and gaps bloom. Sienna Hart said, I lost 2 festivals, and she laughs without light. Aria Vale said, I can pay you back for the lost track, and the offer shakes. Sienna Hart said, just sing on my ep and a path appears. Marco Reyes said, the narrative can bend toward work, and he sketches. Theo Miles said, we can cut live versions in 1 day, and budgets smile. Lena Park said, no surprise contracts, and pens wait. Aria Vale said, we share master and publishing, and fairness returns like rain. The room fills with a harmony shaped like forgiveness. Sienna Hart said, I missed our old small shows, and a grin survives. Phones darken as if to honor a vow. The first chord is clumsy and perfect at once. The apartment smells like cumin and lemon, and truth sits at a small table. Rosa Alvarez said, I still check the hallway before bed, and the cup clinks. Aria Vale said, you changed more than my case, and gratitude steadies. Nora Quinn said, relocation is approved if needed, and forms wait. Rosa Alvarez said, I want my street, and courage smiles. Lena Park said, we'll set a stipend, and the pen moves. Aria Vale said, I wrote you a credit on the record, and a tear wins. Marco Reyes said, community funds are auditing the charity, and the phrase heals. Theo Miles said, I'll deliver the vinyl myself, and promises stack. The kettle whistles like a small applause. Rosa Alvarez said, eat first, then fix the world, and laughter loosens grief. Outside, kids race the sunset and refuse to lose. A bar with 20 chairs offers a stage the size of a promise, and nerves pace. Aria Vale said, no banners, and the owner nods. The set list is half old bones and half new skin. Sienna Hart said, I'll start soft and strings glow. Theo Miles said, 2 mics, no tuning wizardry, and honesty clicks. Marco Reyes said, 1 photographer, no flash, and the night relaxes. Lena Park said, if anyone heckles, we stop, and boundaries breathe. Aria Vale said, if I can sing here, I can live anywhere, and hope stretches. The first note finds a spine it once misplaced. A couple sways like they forgot the news. The last chord lands without reverb, and still rings. Outside, the marquee flickers, not broken, just alive enough to try. Morning feels borrowed, as if the sun signed an NDA before rising. Aria Vale said, the verdict fixed nothing, and coffee cools untouched. Lena Park said, civil suits are circling and calendars hiss. Marco Reyes said, sympathy spikes, then slides and graphs sag. Theo Miles said, streams went up, bookings went dark, and silence invoices hope. Sienna Hart said, we can still tour small, and the word small lands kindly. Aria Vale said, I traded fame for oxygen, and the room nods. A billboard swaps her face for a soda, crisp and indifferent. Nora Quinn said, security remains discreet, and shadows behave. Aria Vale said, I asked for truth, not absolution, and truth stays expensive. The city moves on, but her name still clicks like a loose streetlight. The label conference call arrives like weather, forecasted and inevitable. Executive said, morals clause triggered, and the line crackles. Aria Vale said, I wasn't the one who shoved, and proof sits mute. Lena Park said, her brand predated chaos, and case law shuffles. Marco Reyes said, penalties target optics, and pens pause. Theo Miles said, masters revert unless we pay, and zeros loom. Sienna Hart said, we'll make new songs, and resolve warms. Aria Vale said, I am not a catalog, I am a throat, and air thins. The call ends without goodbye, like a door closing itself. Headlines reframe survival, as scandal reruns. She learns how erasure works, pixel by pixel. A quiet street finds her like a question only she can answer. Aria Vale said, I will sing outside the algorithm, and breath steadies. A passerby whispers yesterday's headline as if it were today's weather. Sienna Hart said, "Open mic, no cameras," and Mercy nods. A blogger aims a lens anyway, hunting echoes. Marco Reyes said, "Let them film kindness failing," and shrugs. Theo Miles said, "We own this pa, we own this night," and cables bloom. Aria Vale said, "I'm still here," and the chord lifts. A child dances because rhythm ignores gossip. Someone claps on 2 and 4 like a promise renewed. The hat fills with small bills shaped like second chances. Night folds the city into a confession booth with no priest. Nora Quinn said, "Cross is appealing," and the word echoes in tile. Aria Vale said, "He can appeal the verdict, not the shove," and silence keeps score. Lena Park said, "We settle civil, protect the witness and priorities stack." Rosa Alvarez said, "I sleep with the radio low, and safety hums." Marco Reyes said, "The charity audits widened and wrought maps." Theo Miles said, "I backed up the debt accounts and servers purr." Sienna Hart said, "Tomorrow we write the hard song and fear nods." Aria Vale said, "I will not sing about him, I will sing past him," and the room breathes. The elevator dings, soft as a heartbeat learning courage. The final upload arrives without warning, a ghost fulfilling a schedule. Theo Miles said, "A dead man post from his cloud, and breath freezes." Marco Reyes said it names 3 executives, and the industry trembles. Lena Park said, "It also splices your backstage meltdown," and the word splices cuts. Aria Vale said, "I was begging, not breaking, and context pleads." Sienna Hart said, "We stand anyway," and the floor steadies. Nora Quinn said, "This broadens the case," and sirens bloom far off. The clip loops, and the world chooses which frame to believe. Aria Vale said, "I will outlast an edit," and the night listens. She walks into the rain without an umbrella. What the world never knew is that the story wasn't over.